Yo, what's up? This is RONEK here at Got No Control Podcast. And before I introduce my special guest today, just want to let you guys know we're on tour right now. We're visiting 3 states: Vegas, Utah, and Colorado. So stay tuned for in-depth conversations on the podcast. We're going to bring in a lot of people from around these states, so we're working on that. And with that being said, I want to choose my special guest today. Buzz, how you doing today,
Hey,
brother?
man. I'm good. Thanks for having me on, man.
Always,
Appreciate
it was a short notice, but we made it happen. We're live here at Machine Studio. For those who know, this is a graffiti shop out here in Vegas. So make sure to check them out when you're in the city. They got everything you need out here. So I want to dive into this conversation, brother. Just getting into a little bit about who is Buzz and where is Buzz originally from.
So I was born in the Valley. I did a lot of graph out there. I got into it in 91. So
Okay.
I don't know. The history stuff, I'm not super passionate about talking about it, but I'll
Okay.
like specifically, like, I don't know. It's, like the older you get, the more your life change. Well, some people, personally, like my life has become something different than that history. So it's kind of weird to talk about it.
Okay.
But I don't mind talking about it. I just, I don't know. Do you want me to just kind of give you the rundown of like,
Sure. I just want to kind of get into like what is home to you? Like where are you originally from?
yeah, so I'm originally from the Valley, and then I grew up outside of the Valley in the suburbs, but ended up moving back to North Hollywood in the
Okay.
90s. And that's when I started getting more into graph, like wanted to be closer to all the action, So I was in North Hollywood and lived in Reseda for a little while, and was doing a lot of bombing in downtown, so it was like
Okay.
closer and shit. So, but as far as like where's home, I never really felt home anywhere. Like I don't feel home here, I didn't feel home there.
So it's very easy for you to just move around and not really be attached to a certain surrounding.
Yeah, to a certain extent. I mean, I didn't move around a lot. I mean, I moved around a little bit, like within Southern California, but
Yeah.
like as far as like when I settled somewhere, I've just never really felt like this is where I'm supposed to be.
Okay.
It's kind of interesting, like when you think about it. Like I kind of feel like I need to be more like in the middle of nowhere. I might feel more home, like
Yeah.
and my girlfriend and I went to this place called Cornville. It's outside of Sedona, Arizona.
Okay.
And I was like, I feel like I could be home here,
Yeah.
like nobody around and all this kind of shit. But for graph, there's, that's probably not a good place to be,
After visiting the South for myself, that's how I felt. Like when being in the South, I was like, man, maybe I could live out here.
Yeah.
Like being very peaceful, like not so much city activity going on. So I could kind of relate to that.
Yeah.
Was art your first creativity as coming up as a child? Like, is that the first thing that you thought about as far as being creative, or did you have other things in motion?
Yeah. I mean, I did some other things. Like I was thinking about this recently, and like growing up, like I grew up in the suburbs, like, lower middle class. So it was
Yeah.
kind of like, you just follow this sort of same pattern that everybody follows, like when you're growing up,
Okay.
like play little league and like football and all this kind of shit. And eventually, I just was doing that because that's what everybody else did. And then, but I was always drawing when I was a kid. So like from the earliest age I can remember, I was always interested in drawing, and so my parents always really supported that, and they, got me whatever little supplies they could afford and shit. And but then there was a time where I was more into like music, like punk rock and hardcore and shit,
Okay.
and skating, and then I kind of stopped doing art for quite a while. And it wasn't until I discovered graffiti that re-sparked my interest in it. So like to this day, I'm not super interested in art specifically. I'm just
Yeah.
interested in graph,
Okay.
So like I went to art school actually from 98 to 2002.
Also, you attended an art institution.
Yeah, but I studied graphic design there, so it's
Okay.
kind of like more of a commercial art type of thing. I wanted
Yeah.
to use creativity to make money, So graphic design is a good, it's a good way to do that. Like you're working for a customer that has
Yeah.
a need, So like if you had I mean, you probably drew that or you had somebody draw it, but like if like a TV show needs a logo, like I could do that and get paid.
Yeah.
And so that, but when I was there, it was interesting because I just wasn't interested in the art stuff, even though like I would see things and I was impressed by it.
Yeah.
I've never really been, once I discovered graffiti, I've never really been interested in any other art form. And to this day, it's the same, like just graph. Like,
Just to take a small step back before we move forward, as a child, you started gaining this passion for art, right? But what about, drawing, whether with a crayon or a water marker? What sparked that interest in you to say, you know what, this is something that I want to start doing?
I think it was my earliest memory was my dad. He was always very artistic.
Okay.
And it's one of those stories where like, they had kids like way too young and they had too many kids and they couldn't afford shit. So like he was always working, so he didn't really get to pursue any kind of art, but he was always really good at sculpting and drawing and shit like that. Like he had these sculptures that he made of, like, one of them was of Jesus, and it was like really impressive,
Oh, wow.
like, and then he had another one that I remember just growing up. It was a Viking head, and it was like painted bronze and shit, and it just was like, I'd always look at it and I'd be like, man, he made that. That's fucking crazy. And then he had this character that he drew. He called it the Sparklets Man. I don't know where that came from, but he showed me how to draw it, and so then I just started drawing that thing everywhere. And I could draw it pretty good. So they started encouraging me, so they bought me like these little art books, from like the 70s and 80s, like, those books that kind of show you step by step, like how to draw Bugs Bunny and shit. Yeah. So like I started just doing that, and they bought me like an art pad, and I just started filling that with cartoon characters and shit. And that was kind of what I did up until high school, when I started kind of seeing graffiti and shit.
Okay.
And then, but there was a gap when I wasn't really doing any art, because I was pursuing music, playing in hardcore bands and shit like that. And skateboarding was more of an interest. I was always terrible at skating, but I loved doing it, but so I wasn't really doing art. Probably like a couple of years, I think I didn't do any art at all.
How did the music enter your life? Because for somebody like me, I really enjoy punk rock, because growing up, my best friends were punk rockers, so I've been to bands and all that stuff.
Yeah.
So how did that culture, enter your lifestyle?
Well, I think my family was always like and my early memories, like in the 70s and 80s, everybody listened to music. Like my parents listened to music.
Yeah.
They had like a huge record collection of like all these like old records, Jimi Hendrix and all this kind of shit. And I wasn't really into that music, but like there was songs like that would come on the radio, like that I can remember, like Billy Idol and like Devo and shit. And there was like a couple songs that like stuck. Joan Jett and the Blackhearts, I Love Rock and Roll, like was a really popular song in my house. And it's funny because like now it seems a little bit, I don't know if embarrassing is the right word, but like I remember there was a change in my musical taste. It was like I liked the music I was hearing, but it wasn't quite enough for me.
Yeah.
And one day I was like watching TV, and this fucking commercial came on, and it was a commercial for Motley Crue, Shout at the Devil. It was like 1982, 84, something like that. And that riff, that fucking Shout at the Devil riff was playing, and I'm like, that's the shit right there. When I was a little kid, I was
that's what I want to bump and listen to.
Yeah, like 5th grade, I think it was. And I was like, what is that? And then it was like Motley Crue, Shout at the Devil. It was like a funny commercial. And so I had a paper route at the time. So I think I was like 10 years old or something. Okay. So I was delivering newspapers. My dad was always like, I remember this conversation well. I think I was like 8 or 9 years old, and he was like, if you always want to have money in your pocket, you should get a paper route. When you're 10 years old, you're allowed to get a paper route. At that time, you probably can't do it now.
Yeah.
They're not going to send.
They got robots now going on.
Yeah. They're not going to send little kids out like they were back then. But so this was early 80s. And so I got a paper route, and I used to just spend all my money on like heavy metal, like records and posters and shit like that. But then later, like my interest progressed to more heavy stuff. So like, I remember my first like more like graduating from like Motley Crue type of music, I bought an album from the band Exodus.
Okay.
So like I was like, oh man, this is, and even then I was kind of like, maybe this is a little too much, you know, like I felt it was kind of satanic. And this was during the satanic panic. I don't know how old you are, but like you probably weren't around during that time.
No, I wasn't. I wasn't.
So like it was an interesting time to be into heavy metal because like Motley Crue was considered a satanic band back then because they had like the pentagram and like all the shirts had like satanic imagery and shit, but like they're obviously not, you know, they were like a glam rock band, you know? But I remember like religious people would tell me shit and they would say like, oh, you know, if you keep listening to that, you're going to go to hell. And I was like, oh man, I don't want to go to hell. Like I was a little kid. So, you know, you're impressionable when people say shit like that. I remember this one, I don't know if we're getting too off track here, but like, I remember this one religious kid, he was a little older than me. He would take me to the record store and like show me the album covers and tell me like what all the satanic meaning was. And he's like, look at this. He showed me, I remember he showed me the Slayer album Hell Awaits, or it was either Hell Awaits or Rain and Blood. I don't remember, but it had all this like real satanic looking imagery. And like they were convincing me that if I kept listening to this, I was going to go to hell and I would start listening to or worshiping the devil. And I remember telling my dad that, and he was like, what are you talking about? Like, I was like, am I going to worship the devil? And he's like, well, do you want to worship the devil? And I said, no. And he's like, well, then don't don't worship the devil. It's not, it's like stupid, you know?
I think sometimes I think things could get taken out of proportion, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Well,
especially those times.
Someone that doesn't understand a culture or even a genre, they don't understand that. And also the beauty of it, right? Like pre-internet where you actually go and get a record, play it, listen to it, rather than going on Spotify or Apple Music and just, oh, I got it, boom, you know? So things have definitely changed. You know, I also I wanted to dive into, you know, you're into punk and heavy metal. At what point does graffiti stumble across your eyesight and you're like, oh, what is that?
That was like 1990 when I started seeing it. I think I was like, I got into it later than most people. So I was like probably 16 when I started seeing it. And at first I was like, you know, it was an interesting place to grow up because like people would adopt shit real fast, you know, like there was this time when like, and again, this is like the suburbs, a very safe neighborhood, you know, and there's no reason for gangbanging out there. Like there's nobody to, you know, there's nobody to gangbang against, you know?
So be tripping on the air with it.
So like it ended up becoming like, I don't know if it was like people saw the movie Colors or something. And then they decided like, we're going to start a gang. And so you'd see these kids that are like, you know, quote unquote nerds, you know, and then the next day they're all banged out. Like they got their hair slicked back. They got like the, you know, the Ben Davis, remember the Ben Davis shirts that they were pretty much like strictly gangbangers wore them. I don't remember which one it was, but
they had Pendletons, I believe.
Yeah, they would wear those and like the creased Dickies and shit. But it was like from one day to the next, like they changed their whole look and shit. Like their entire personality. Like yesterday they were wearing like, you know, normal clothes or whatever, and then the next day I'm like, who the fuck? Like how
yesterday was like, hi Bob, and tomorrow's like, hey homie, where you?
Yeah, where are you from? It was just such a weird thing, and like people would hit me up all the time because I was a tagger. And so I dressed like what a tagger looked like in the 90s, you know, like a 4X fucking pullover sweatshirt and like size 50
Oh, so there was a style to the culture at that given moment?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, at least that was my perception. Like big, huge, oversized Dickies, Chucks, and like 3X t-shirts and shit. Wow, like we look kind of ridiculous, you know. But that was kind of the look, you know. That's how like a lot of us dressed. So anyway, to your point, when did that come in?
Yeah.
So around 1990, I started seeing it, but I didn't understand what it was. So I'm backtracking just a slight bit. I didn't understand what I was seeing. I just saw people like writing these names.
Yeah.
And to the point where I was getting to is like people switched up real quick. So a lot of these kids that were starting to get into graph, they would change their whole look from one day to the next also and change the way they carried themselves. So when I saw that, I was kind of a dick in high school and kind of like a hater a little bit. And so when I saw that happening, I was like, man, what are these fucking, you know, what are these guys doing? Like scribbling shit and acting like they're all cool and shit. And they would try to explain it to me. Like, I remember this one kid was like, let me hit up on your notebook. I'm like, all right. And he wrote his name on there. And then this other kid that was a writer had beef with him. So he went and crossed it out and wrote toy. And this was on my notebook.
Yeah.
I'm like, what does that mean? And he starts explaining to me like what the word toy was.
Okay.
And when they were explaining it, I thought it was so stupid. I was like, what the fuck are you talking about? So it was like coming around so much that I started writing to hate on people, like to just be a dick. So I wrote cheese.
Yeah.
I bought like a, one of those little paint markers. I remember it was a green bullet paint marker, and I just started writing cheese all over the place, just joking, you know.
Yeah.
But then what started out was me kind of hating on it. I started being like, well, I kind of like writing on everything. Like, that's pretty fun, you know? So like, then I started getting more into it and, you know, started getting paint and all that stuff. So it was 91 when I started.
Was there any early influences, like maybe somebody that you already seen up, like already doing things on your side of town at that given moment?
Yeah, there was this one dude, Glue, and I think the crew was called KM.
Okay.
And I don't, like, even thinking back, like they were pretty good, you know? And so it was pretty dope. And then Fable, AWR, like a couple AWRs lived out there. Fable, Bless, Saber lived around there. So I was starting to see some of that stuff. Those guys didn't generally write too much out there. They kind of traveled out to West LA or the Valley. But I started seeing that kind of stuff around. The local crews were getting up in my area. But then when I started meeting some of these other guys, well, I didn't really meet any like AWRs or MSKs MSK wasn't around at the time. We can get into that later, but like MSK was started in 87, but it was kind of dormant. So around that time, the guys in that area were like Fable and Bless, and I think Crisis was out there, a couple other people, but they were AWR.
Yeah.
And then Fate and Havoc and Gank were sort of close to there, Gone. They were all from that crew AD. I don't know if that's probably before your time. Like, how old are you? When did you? Just so I know when we're talking. You don't have to tell me how old you are, but like how long you've been in the scene.
I entered the scene in 2005.
Okay, so yeah. So this was way before that. This was like early 90s, maybe even late. Yeah, early 90s.
I was born in the 90s.
No shit. I was born in 73, man. Yeah. It's weird, man. It's a trip.
You know, you start writing cheese, right? Just kind of like for the fun of it. Like, man, screw these people. I'm going to just mess with everybody, right?
Yeah, yeah.
But at what point does it get serious to where, like, you know, I'm fully going to go for this and, like, really adapt myself and start learning styles and learn how to bomb and stuff like that?
Yeah. It all happened pretty fast. Like, I don't think I wrote cheese for more than a couple months. Okay. And then I was like, man, I actually kind of like this. So I picked like a bunch of different names. I can't even remember all of them, but like, I think I wrote like sec or scrag or some just weird words, you know? And, and then I think that same year I picked the name Game, and I wrote that from like either early 92 or late 91 to 93. Yeah. And then I met Gank, and I started painting with him, and I was a toy. So I think it was like sort of this mutual benefit type of situation where he doesn't have a car, I have a car. Yeah. You know, maybe I suck, but like at least I can kind of like
pick him up around.
Yeah. So that's how that's my perception. He never told me that, but like, I was a toy and he was a well-known guy. And like, not well-known like he is now, but like he was on it was like Gank, Fate, Havoc, and Saber, and Gone, and like some of those early AD guys. Okay. That's the crew they were in before MSK. Like those were the guys I looked up to the most. And like when I would go out to like Hollywood or the Valley or something like that, I would always see them up. I'd see CR, I'd see Pale, Unit, like guys like that. Okay. And so, but I was mostly influenced by them. So when I met Gank, I was, you know, kind of jockeying, you know, because like it was like the first. I don't want to say those other guys weren't real writers, because like they were just, you know, not pushing it like these guys were. You know?
I got you.
And so when
they were at a different level.
Yeah, they were like, you know, they were getting up a lot, like center dividers and all these different spots and
And
shit.
are they the ones that introduce you to a terminology like getting up, capping, bombing, piecing?
Yeah. So like I had some early mentors in my neighborhood. There was this guy Risen that I learned a lot from him.
Yeah.
He was like very talented. He was probably like one of the best guys out there. It's like, you know, small pond type of scenario, but he was really talented and really he knew his stuff. So I learned some stuff from him and I learned some stuff from some of the other people around there. But it wasn't until I met Gank that I really started to learn like really what was up. And like Gank made a concentrated effort to school me and everything. Cause like if we're gonna spend a lot of time together, he doesn't want me to not know what the fuck's going on. And you know, so he was helping me learn the history, learn what crews were what out in LA and stuff like that. He was also like kind of like one of those guys that's like a human atlas, you know, like be like, oh, there's this little wall over here and like turn left, turn right, get off right here, you know.
There was no Google Maps back then.
Yeah, he was like Google Maps, you know, and so he always knew all the spots. So it was cool to paint with him, and I spent a lot of time with him from '93 till I'd say I don't remember the timeline specifically, but I think it was 93 to 94. We spent a lot of time together, and he taught me a whole bunch of stuff.
You know, and that era, like the early stages, right? Like you said, like you were out there like in the 80s, right? You know, hip hop to some individuals was very impactful, right? And that's how some of them developed styles, looking at New York writers and, you know, subway artists, stuff like that. Was that something that impacted you?
Yes and no. Like part of me wishes that I understood what I was seeing when that was happening. Cause like in the 80s, I remember Run DMC like kind of hit the scene and, I didn't like that kind of music. Like I still like hip hop is fine, but like I'm more of a punk rock kind of guy. And like our brand for the business here is more, I know we're an element of hip hop, but like we play punk music here and shit like that. So like, that's kind of like, that's always been my interest. So I wasn't really particularly influenced by the music. But in sixth grade, I remember there was this kid, Dave, that I was also really influenced from the art side of things. And he brought in a book, and I think it was Subway art. It was just so long ago, I don't remember, but I'm fairly certain it was Subway art or spray can art maybe. And he was kind of flipping through it, and I'm like, what is that? And he started kind of like explaining what it was, but like, it just did not click for me at the time. Like I didn't understand what I was looking at. Like I was like, this doesn't make any sense. It looks cool. So I all but forgot about that. So that would have been, I don't know, early mid 80s when that happened. But I do remember my dad was a big Raiders fan, and so he would go to Raiders games when they were playing at the Coliseum in downtown.
LA?
Yeah. So I went to a couple games with him. I'm not super interested, but I just wanted to hang out with my dad, you know? And I remember Graff was popping off out there in the 80s. And I remember seeing like, you know, I kind of barely remember it, but there was like characters and shit and just stuff you'd see on the freeway and in downtown when you were driving to the Coliseum. And I remember asking my dad, like, I was like, why is that illegal to put that there? And he was like, well, it just is. I'm like, but it looks so cool. Like the wall looks way better with that on it. And I don't even remember what it was, you know? But I also remember in my neighborhood, there was like a piece of graph there that I kind of remember what it looked like to a certain extent, but it was like a freeway underpass. Oh, no, I'm good. I got one right here. Thanks, man. There was a freeway underpass that we would pass all the time. This is probably like 83 or something like that, or maybe somewhere around there. And I know it was graffiti because, like, thinking back, I don't remember exactly what it looked like, but I remember like the energy that it had. You know, like you know how like I don't know if people do it anymore, but you know, like people at the bottom of the letter, it would form like a heart shape.
Okay.
You know that style that people do, like
yeah, I've seen it. It's kind of like
like a
I
clover.
know what you're talking about,
like
but it's like
maybe
an
like a
R, and
clover.
then it'll be like a heart on the bottom.
Yeah. It had that on there. Like I remember that.
Oh wow.
And so we would drive past that all the time. It could have been 79 actually. It was a long time ago.
Yeah.
And somebody put that there. And they eventually buffed it. And I just like still think like, man, I wish as a little kid I had the sort of like the frame of mind to ask my dad to take a picture of that, you know,
Yeah.
because like you don't think like that's not going to be there forever. And then they painted over it. And I'm like, why the fuck would they paint over that? Like that looks so cool.
That's the last thing that you're thinking about, huh? Like, oh, next time I come, I'll see it again. And
Yeah,
then
you
come
just
back
think it's
again,
always going to be there.
and it's all long gone. It's like,
Yeah.
you know, for me, brother, when I would go to punk shows as a kid, because I was heavily influenced by that, because my buddies, my best friends, the first time I met a guy that was punk rock that told me he wrote, to me it was like that was it. Like, oh damn, no way. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And like, to me, it was just such a trip. Trip. Seeing a full-on punk rocker with a mohawk. You know what I mean? Like, oh, I paint too.
Yeah.
That to me was like a good feeling. You know, being at the shows and stuff.
Yeah. There was a lot of crossover in the hardcore and punk and stuff like that and graph. Like I wasn't around in the 70s, like when it started, you know, really happening. But in the 90s, I remember like a large portion of the hardcore scene were also writers, you know.
And some punk rockers were heavily talented because they were painting their own leather jackets.
Oh yeah.
So if you wanted like a band on your leather jacket, you have to get some paint markers.
Yeah.
And then just paint the band, or if you have your own band, paint your own band.
Yeah, for sure.
At what point do you start traveling out of the valley to engage in graffiti?
So I think about 93, I started moving into the valley and bombing out there, doing just like toy shit,
Yeah.
you know, trying to, because I remember some of the crews that I would see in my neighborhood, they started kind of graduating to that because like, you know, you don't really want to bomb in a small town.
Yeah.
Like once you start to understand that, you're like, all right, I got to get out of here. And so people would be like, oh, I don't paint out here. I paint over, you know, in the valley. And so I'm like, all right, well, I guess I got to go to the valley. So in 92, I started going out there. And I don't think I started going to LA until 93 when I met Gank.
Okay.
So like when I met Gank, he's the one that was like, you can't write game, you got to change your name. So we were driving around. And I had a 1966 Volkswagen bus at the time. That's what I drove. Yeah. I miss that thing, man. I wish I still had it. But that's what we would go bombing in, like the most conspicuous vehicle you could possibly fucking be out there. And so we were driving around and he's like, you got to change your name, man. Let's come up with a new name. And so we're just driving. I'm like, I don't know. We're just throwing things around. And he's like, you should just write bus. And I'm like, all right. And he's like, well, Dondi wrote bus. In the 70s, he wrote Bus 129. But I don't know if that phrase is universal, like called the undercover name. Do you ever hear that?
Yeah, when it was kind of like they'll come on and paint out another name just so nobody will know who they are.
Yeah, so that's what we thought that was. And so Gank was like, you could write Bus, but Dondi wrote Bus 129. But that was his undercover name, so I don't know, maybe it's okay. Maybe, you know, in retrospect, I probably would have picked a different name had I been thinking about it. It's kind of too late now, but so we were like, well, if I write a different number. So I was driving a 66 bus, so I was like, all right, Bus 66.
Yeah.
But it was like hard to say because like one thing ends with an S and the next thing starts with an S. So it was like Bus 66. There's like a hiss in the middle. I'm like, all right, I'll add a bus, or add a one. So Bus 166.
Okay.
And so that's 93 was when I started writing that.
Oh, so you had the name Bus since 93.
Yeah.
Sheesh.
Yeah, it's been
that name's as old as me.
It's like sometimes I'm like, I'm kind of done with this name, man. But it's like, you know.
But it kind of sticks to you, right? Because like I have guys that like don't even call me by my real name.
Yeah.
So that's how you know someone's really close to me when they call me by my real name. You know
Yeah,
what I mean?
yeah.
So I could kind of relate to that. Being in the valley, right? And then meeting Gank and then hitting LA. Would you say there was any type of difference between the Valley and LA as far as like surroundings when it came to the graffiti aspect of it?
Yeah, trying to think how to articulate this the best, but it did feel different. And there was a time when it felt like I just wanted to get further and further away from my neighborhood. So like when I first started painting, I was cool with painting like right when the Valley turned into LA County. So that would be like Topanga and shit like that, like right there. I was cool with that. And then eventually I was like, man, I don't want to paint like over here anymore. Like a little further out was cooler. Like it seemed like the more places that had like hoods and shit where the, you know, and there wasn't as many. I mean, there were, but like it didn't feel quite like that. So like North Hollywood definitely was pretty dangerous at that time. So I was like cool with painting out there. And like a lot of the STPs were just like dominating out there. So you saw like Tulsa was just up fucking everywhere, huge things out in North Hollywood in that area. So like I was cool with painting out there, and there was this part of Sherman Way that was like just so much fun to paint. Like there was a lot of heavy hitters that were painting out there at the time. And so we were painting there. That was 93. And then I remember there was a point, because I was playing in hardcore bands at this time, and I was spending a lot of time with Gank, and he started getting into hardcore too. Like just sort of going to the shows with me. So when we played a show, he came with me, and then on the way back, he was like, let's drive through downtown on the way back. And at the time, like I didn't even really know why, you know. I was like, all right, let's go. I just remember him saying, I say we go through downtown. And I'm like, all right, where do I get off? Like, where's downtown? You know, like I didn't even know shit.
And the bus.
Yeah, so we get off in downtown, and we start driving down those streets like Broadway, Los Angeles and shit. And that's when I was like, okay, this is the type of graffiti that I want to do. Like that's when it really clicked. Like I was passionate about it up until this time. But that one trip through downtown LA, it was transformational. I don't use that word very often, but that's the only one I can think of.
Yeah.
But it really did, because that was when, like back then, there was so much graffiti out there, and there probably is now. I haven't been there for a little while, but like all the businesses were closed. You know, it was like after midnight, probably 2 a.m. or something. So everything's closed. All the metal grills are down on all the businesses, and all of them are just fucking, you know, just hammered by like Chaka, Sleaze, Tumor was up all over the place. It was fucking, it was just crazy to see. And that's when I was just like, I got to be out here. This is where I got to be.
The nostalgia of it.
Yeah. Because there was stuff from the 80s still running out there.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it was like, I felt like I was seeing like, not that the Valley graffiti wasn't real, but like it just felt more real to me. You know, that was my perception. And I know that's my perception, because I don't want to hate on the Valley at all. Because I mean, Tulsa came from there. And like I said, the STPs were like, they were just dominating out there. It was the San Fernando Valley was like a really good place to write. But like for me, I think, you know, also I kind of like was always like thinking like New York and all this kind of shit.
Yeah.
And so like, although downtown is like nothing like New York, like maybe it is, I don't know. But it just felt more like that kind of graffiti, you know, like big high-rise buildings and shit. And like the streets are just, I don't know. It just felt more like, that just felt like more of the kind of graffiti that I wanted to do.
You know, I've had conversations with a lot of friends from the Valley and these recent days, right? And a lot of them express that in a way it kind of feels like guys from LA are kind of very territorial of LA when you have outsiders like people from the Valley coming in.
Yeah.
At that point, when you were coming into LA, did you feel that?
I didn't feel it directly, but I did hear stuff. Like, I remember trying to think, because Gank or GK and I started painting a lot. And we started kind of like, I think this was around 94. We started kind of like meeting a lot of different writers. So we started meeting people from, I don't know exactly where everybody's from, but we were going to like South Central a lot and Southgate and different places like that. And so we started meeting different writers from somewhere around there. Like I said, I don't know where these guys are from, but like Chico and Bruin, we met, and like I remember meeting Chrome, and I was just like, oh my god, like I think we met Rock back then. I don't remember, but like there was like a lot of guys that were writing in those areas of LA, and I remember something happened with our crew. This is like when like I got an MSK in '93, so we were like really going.
Oh, so you've been
strong.
around an MSK for a minute.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I could talk about that if you want.
Sure.
But yeah. So somebody made a comment. And it was like there was like some kind of I don't want to get too far into it, but it was like some violence happened, and I think it was Chrome that I was talking to, but I might have it wrong. But it was somebody from that area, and they were like, "Yeah, I was surprised that happened because like, you know what? I might be mixing this all up." I might be totally mixing it up, but like what I'm saying is like somebody said, "Oh, they're a Valley crew. Like MSK is a Valley crew."
Okay.
Yeah, and so that's when I was like, "What does that matter?" Like, you know, I didn't think it mattered that much, but then that's when I started seeing, or just kind of getting little bits and pieces. Like,
okay,
as far as like people kind of like hating on shit, like I'd never really kind of felt that. Like, when I put in a lot of work, like in '95 is I think when I put in probably the most amount of work. I was it was like a 3-month period where I got laid off from my job, and I was like, I've always been very responsible and never was out of work for that long.
Okay,
but I was like so into graffiti at the time that I was like, well, if these people laid me off, I was like, I could collect unemployment and just kind of like just bomb, you know? So I was like, I'm going to stretch that out for as long as I can. And so at the time I was, I don't know how far into this I want to get into, but I was living with this girl and her mom, and I don't want to influence youngsters to do stupid shit like this. So I'm just going to say, don't do this stuff.
yeah,
But what we were doing is the girl and I would go and we would steal a bunch of shit, like paint sprayers and really expensive stuff. And then the mom would go and return it all for
store credit?
for credit. Yeah, this was like early days of store credit. But she would return it all for spray paint. So I ended up with like 300 cans of just Krylons and Rustos and shit. And then at night, the mom would take me bombing. So like I didn't have to paint with anybody, you know.
I need a mother-in-law that's down for me like that.
Yeah. So what I liked about that is like, you know, like going painting with somebody like Saber, like he's so talented and he's so good at like stretching his letters out.
Yeah.
So like we would go painting together and like, I would think I'm going all big, you know, and I'm like, oh yeah, this is fucking huge. And I'd look over and his ass is bigger than my whole thing. I'm like, I couldn't conceptualize how do you stretch your letters out so far, you know, and stuff like that. So when I was able to go bombing by myself, I was like, well, this is perfect because I can find all kinds of spots that just like a spot like as big as this thing, you know, you don't have 2 or 3 guys with you, you know, so like that's perfectly fine for me because I'm the only one, you know, so I'd be out there bombing downtown every night by myself. You know, she would just pull over and I'd just get out, do my thing, get in the car. We'd go to the next spot.
With the girlfriend or just you?
No, the girlfriend was sleeping and the mom would just take me out. And so, I mean, it was a terrible relationship and like, you know, but that particular arrangement was really good for me as far as graffiti is concerned, because like I did enough work in downtown to where like I feel like when I met people from further out, they knew who I was, you know. So it was like it wasn't so much like if I was in a yard in the valley and I met some youngsters, I could be pretty sure that they're going to know who I was because I was up a lot out there. But I really started caring about like, well, what are these guys? Like these guys out here, Chrome, Rock, Tumor, and shit like that. Like I want them to know who I am, you know? So that's when I was like painting a lot in downtown.
Is MSK your first crew?
I mean, I had some like toy crews, you know, in the early days, but MSK was like my first real crew.
And is that where you stayed, or did you end up getting into in more crews?
Yeah, I got into some other crews. It didn't really work out. Like I got into STP in '94. I love that crew. Like, I wouldn't say anything bad about them, but there was like a, how can I say this? That crew started heading in a direction that like I wasn't built for. You know, it was like they. I don't know how much of this is public knowledge, so I don't want to say too much. But like they started moving more in the gang direction.
Yeah.
And I was just like, I'm not a gangster, man. This is not my thing. And when I got into the crew, I knew that it was like kind of like a more, you know, you don't fuck with them kind of crew, you know. But it just kind of started going into like, you know, a lot more than I was comfortable with. So I ended up like, I had some guys come to my house looking for me because they knew that STPs hung out at the house that I was at in North Hollywood.
Oh, wow.
Well, they didn't come looking for me specifically. They came looking for anybody because like some shit happened.
Yeah.
And they got me out on the street and I was like, they were friends of mine, you know, but they were, you know, they were out for
revenge.
You know, yeah. And so they were surrounding me and I'm just like, what's going on? Like, you know, we're friends. Like they started saying like what happened. And by this time I had sort of disconnected from STP a little bit because I was just like starting to not be comfortable with what was going on.
Yeah.
And so it was interesting. Like I talked my way out of it and nothing happened to me, luckily, because like I ended up talking to those guys years later and they were like, I don't think you understand how lucky you were. Because they were looking for like, you know, I don't want to say too much, but you know.
Do you feel like that Fox 11 segment that they did where like they made it seem like every guy with a can was up to that lifestyle, kind of, you know, influenced that behavior?
I don't know how much that influenced it, but that was now I'm kind of disconnected from like the street stuff now. Like I talk to a lot of people, but I'm not out there like I used to be. But it was a particularly violent time. You know, it was like it was a lot of crews that were tag banging and all that kind of stuff. So like when that thing came out, I was already well aware of all that stuff. And I tried to avoid it, you know, because I've never really been a violent guy, you know.
It's interesting though how it has the actual name in there, banging, like tag banging.
Yeah.
It's kind of like.
And I mean, that I didn't hang around with a lot of those people, but like that's what I understood what was happening. It was like it was just almost like gangs that did graph, you know.
Okay, gotcha.
You know, so it was, I don't know.
Was gang the reason why you entered MSK?
Yeah. Okay. So 93 we started riding together. I changed my name to Bus. I had met them I think late 92. I was opening this, it never ended up getting off the ground, but I was friends with this dude Jesse. And he and I were going to open like this like clothing business, like a hip hop like clothing type of thing. This was 91 or I think it was, no, sorry, 92, late 92. And he was friends with like Gank, Havoc, Fate, and all those guys.
Yeah.
And so we were doing that thing and we were over at the place, like kind of cleaning it up and everything. And those guys would come around. And at one point, like, we were going to paint the floor, so we just started bombing up the floor and shit. And so, like, the whole floor was just covered in graph. And, like, Havoc had to throw in there. And I don't think I had met Gank yet at this time. And so they were all in a crew called AD at the time. So it was all those guys that I mentioned and Saber and can't remember who else was in there. But
because AWR was first, right?
Yeah, so well, I don't know the whole history of like MSK like before I got in.
Yeah.
It was like sorry, I'm not used to talking this long. My throat's getting a little scratchy.
Okay.
So MSK was started, I believe, in 1988 by Baba and Eclipse. And I don't know a whole lot about it. I never asked about it. I probably should have, but my understanding was that it was meant to be sort of like a stepping stone to AWR.
Okay.
And I don't know if they did anything with it because I never heard of it until AD got dissolved and all those guys moved into MSK. So like I had not met them. I met Havoc and Fate, I think, and they were writing AD. And then all of a sudden, this was in this little shop that I was at. So they were writing AD on the floor and on the back wall and all this shit. But then one day I went in and I saw, I don't remember who it was, maybe like Gone MSK. It didn't say AD. And I was like, oh, what is this? What's MSK? And so my understanding is like they dissolved AD and put all those guys in MSK, I think in late 92.
What did AD stand for?
I think it was like After Dark or something like that, or All Day. All Day, I think it was too.
And then just so you know, your friend Gank, before you met him and when you met him, he was AD enter MSK, right? And is he kind of like, hey, you should join type thing?
It took a while for that to happen. It took a few months. So like we started painting together. He started schooling me. We started going bombing with like all the guys, you know. So I was painting with Fate and Havoc. I didn't paint with Gone too much. But Fate, Havoc, Gank, and then some other kind of like hang around people, we would go bombing together. And I think, I don't know, I never asked him, so I don't know exactly how it is. So I'll just tell you like what my perception of it was. Like it could be totally wrong. Like if you asked Gank, what I perceive it to be is I was a toy, I had a car. So we started painting together. So I can't stress enough that I'm just speculating about this. So what I think was happening was he was like, if I'm going to go painting with this person, like I should at least put him up on some games so I'm not hanging around with a total fucking shithead, you know? Yeah. So he started telling me all this stuff. He tried to give me some letters and things like that. And then I think at some point we actually became friends, and he must have seen some potential in me because he recommended me to get put on the crew.
Okay.
And so that was like, I feel like it was like mid 93.
Gotcha.
And so they brought me to the meeting. And at that time, it was the meetings were with AWR. So AWR basically had control over what happened in MSK at the time.
Okay.
And so in order to put somebody on, AWR had to approve it. And so
it was very serious though. It was like you just don't walk in. You gotta you gotta earn it.
And on that note, like I'm still surprised I got put on, to be honest with you. Like, cause when I look at the stuff that I was doing, it was really, really bad. Like, and if I saw it now, I don't know if I would see all that much potential, but I feel like they wouldn't have put me on if they didn't see some potential. I don't know if AWR even was aware of me. Yeah. They probably just took Gank. Like, I don't know. I don't remember. I remember the meeting to a certain extent, but I think it was Gank mainly that was vouching for me. And I think they probably took his word for it.
Okay.
But then at that time, you know, it was like my styles were terrible. And I was pretty much like, if I remember this right, MSK was 7 people. Like AD got dissolved. All those guys moved in. And then the originals was Baba and Eclipse. And then there was this other guy that like, I don't even know what happened to him. Like I never met him, but like it was a name that I saw. And then all of a sudden it was just nobody talked about it anymore.
Did you ever believe it was going to become what it has become?
I don't know if I ever believed that it was going to become like what it is now, but I always was like, like when I got put on, like nobody knew who that crew was.
Yeah.
Like, it had pretty much like, I know it started in the 80s, but like it didn't really come on the scene until they put those guys on. Yeah. They put the AD guys on. Excuse me. But I was so fucking honored to be put on that crew, even though nobody knew who it was, you know?
So you were part of it's fair to say you were kind of part of the development of MSK.
Yeah, nobody knew. Nobody knew who it was at the time.
I have a question for you. So I have had this conversation in the past with certain individuals that have a different state of mind than mine. So they feel like, I don't want to say no names just because it's not my place. Yeah. But they feel like certain individuals from that crew should not be, how can I say it? They feel like just because they come from stable homes, that they should kind of be looked at differently than someone that came from bottom zero project baby type thing, right? Yeah. But my perspective on it is like, It doesn't matter if you're super rich, super poor. You still got to put in the work.
Yeah, I heard that a lot. I still hear it. It's a phrase that comes up like, "Oh, well, we had to do this, but these guys, the phrase is they use their mommy's credit card to buy paint."
Yeah.
You know, I did not grow up in a rough neighborhood. I didn't grow up in the projects. My parents were far from rich, but at the same time, I had a very stable upbringing. You know, so I don't get offended by that. I don't really care if people want to have that perception. That's perfectly fine for me. The way I really look at it is like, did you put in work or not? You know,
Yeah.
like I don't really care where you came from. On that note, though, I do have a different respect for the people that did come up in those tough neighborhoods, because like that's a whole different way. And I don't know what it's like, obviously, because I didn't come up in that, but I did meet a lot of people.
Yeah.
Like I would go pick tolls up in the projects in Pacoima. And I was like, I don't know if I'm gonna get out of here alive, dude. Like this place is crazy, you know?
Yeah.
Or, God, what was that neighborhood? Boyle Heights. I don't know what it's like now. I think there's some gentrification going on, but like in the 90s, man, I remember we accidentally went to Boyle Heights and we were like, we got to get the fuck out of here, dude. Like,
let's go.
yeah, it was just like the projects, and there was gang blocks like on the front of the projects. I was like, this is not the place for us to go. You know, coming up and started hanging out with Toomer, and he's from the hood. You know, it was I definitely have a respect for people that had to come up that way and managed to use graffiti to avoid like the gangs and stuff. You know, like I think that's something I hear a lot, and it's something I can't relate to. Like people say like graffiti saved my life. Like at one point it was like I was either going to join a gang or I was going to do graph. So like I didn't have to deal with any of that stuff. So I may have had it easier on a lot of perspectives, but like I did all the stuff that was expected of me. I did all the crime. I racked paint and all that stuff. And my parents never paid for any of my shit. It was like I did pay for stuff. I had a job. Like I was always really responsible. So like I always had money. So like I did racking and store credits. We called it rack and return back then. So I did all that stuff. Like I was like heavily into that stuff.
What do you say to that guy in 2024 that's kind of like, well, we used to rack our paint back then. You guys don't be racking, but it's like as a shop owner, I mean, it wouldn't be cool for someone to come in here and try to rack your paint.
No.
So
absolutely not.
So what is your take on that?
I really don't like that. Like I don't like the old timer mentality, like the back in my day stuff. I personally don't like it. Like I'm not gonna hate on anybody that has that mentality, but it's just like I just don't care. It doesn't matter to me where you got your paint. Yeah. Like it just doesn't. Like if you want to buy your paint, cool. If you don't, that's cool too. You know, it tends to be this all or nothing thing sometimes where it's just like, you know, if you buy your paint, you're a toy. And it's like, I came up with some of the best writers, and like we all bought paint. I'm not saying I'm one of the best writers. I'm just saying like people that I saw, like Saber, I think is probably one of the best writers of all time.
Yeah, I agree.
He racked, he bought paint when he had to. Like it was known back then. It was like $20 is 8 cans. Like back when Krylon was $2.50.
Yeah.
You know, $20. I got $20. I could buy 8 cans. Like, so we did both, you know, and everybody I knew did both. Like even Gank, like he was like hardcore into all that stuff, and Fate, like they were all like really hardcore into rack. I don't know if Fate bought paint. Fate's gnarly. I don't know if he did or not, but like,
did you ever believe though that like coming from a time where you guys are using Krylon and Rust-Oleums, right? Did you ever believe like someone was really gonna pay like $5 for a Montana when it started coming in?
No, like I started hearing about it. I don't remember when I first heard about it, in the mid 90s or something. Oh, you got to try this Montana. I just never saw it. Like, I didn't know where do you even get that.
Yeah.
Like, there wasn't graph shops or anything. Like, there was like Beat Nonstop, I think was a place in the Valley. And then Hex had his spot. But like, I think Hex's spot was gone by the time that stuff happened.
Okay.
So the hip hop shop, I think it was the first graph shop, at least in LA. I don't know if there was ones elsewhere, but
You had a chance to walk in there?
yeah, one time in 91. Yeah.
How was it?
It was very, very intimidating, because like you got to think like 91, I was a teenager and like I was so new to the scene. I was basically an imposter. You know what I mean? Like that's how it felt. So when I walked in there, I was just like I don't even want to say, I was like embarrassed, to be who I was, cause that's not how they treated people. Not that I remember. I don't remember even talking to anybody. But I remember going in there and I remember seeing like fat caps for sale and like fucking Hex had a bunch of like B-boy characters and shit drawn up and stuff. And I was just like, man, this is just so far above like where I'm at, like I couldn't even appreciate it. It was just so, and that area too. And I remember like, it was lots of graph, like a lot of the CBS's had, was where the Melrose alleys were and shit. So right outside of the shop, there was just graph that like I just couldn't even understand how it was done.
Was understanding the culture kind of like a little like, damn, this is different because LA is had a lot of Chicanos, right? And not really understanding the Chicano culture and coming into a place where it's heavily influenced.
Yeah.
Was that kind of like taking the time to sit in?
Yeah, and I don't know if I really understood that at the time because I do remember like Tolls and a lot of those guys would have influence by the gang writing type of stuff, the Chicano style, but I don't know if I fully understood it. I remember like wanting to like, cause it looks so cool, but I was like, I can't do that. I can't do my S like that because it looks like it's influenced by that. And I just didn't feel like it was appropriate for me to be influenced by that at the time. I don't know if that's
because then they're gonna start thinking that Bus is a gang, and then
or I mean, just like I'm perpetrating like I'm a Chicano or something. I don't know. I don't really. I might be overthinking it, but like
I just felt the same way though. I would have felt the same way.
Yeah,
like,
it just seemed like
you don't want to be looked at as like, oh, this guy's trying to be a culture vulture type.
Yeah, exactly. That's kind of like. And I think there's. Like I do this S now that I don't even know if I do it that much anymore, but it's like it's influenced by that. And I remember I had these letters and I did them in like 95, and if you looked at it a certain way, you could probably see gang blocks in it.
Okay.
But I never went full on like, you see those guys that like their shit just looks like real nice gang blocks, like I always thought that looked so cool, but I was like, I can't do that, but like
with the spider web,
all that cool shit, and the fucking the zigzag 3D fill,
with a little crack in the 3 dots.
Yeah. I couldn't do that, but I remember I did do these letters where like they were my letters like normal, how I normally did them, but they went up at an angle, and I felt like that was as close as I was like, I'm not going to take this any further, like
gotcha.
I don't even know. It was influenced by that, but I think it was like. It looked like graph letters. It just went up like in an angle,
different angle on it.
Yeah.
Was opening up a shop always a goal for you?
No, it was never a goal for me, honestly. So what ended up happening is in 2014, or it might have even been 2013, or no, 2014. I don't remember. Oh, Jess from STP, he's still like one of my favorite writers. Like I was so heavily influenced by him in the 90s. He was one of the main reasons why I got an STP back then. Okay. Like Jess, Pale, Tolls. There was a dude, Sinner, that was getting up a lot. This dude, Aerosec. They were up a lot. But like Jess was always like such a big influence for me. Like he had those like simple letters. And what was also cool about him is like, out of everybody, when I got out of STP, when that shit happened, there was a lot of I don't know. Like when I would see them, I'd be like, "Hey, what's up?" And they would kind of like mad dog me a little bit. Like, so I was like, okay, it wasn't like an amicable.
Yeah.
Again, my perception, and I can't stress enough, I'm not hating on that crew. I love those guys. But Jess always kept in touch. Like somehow he'd find me like on Facebook or something. Obviously that wasn't around between 95 and whenever that came out, but like
It was more like picking up the payphone and
yeah, exactly. The beepers and shit. And so Jess would like kind of keep in touch with me through social media, like early social media, probably even like Friendster. I don't know if that's before your time.
You got to put me up on game. What's Friendster?
Friendster was like the first social media that I ever heard of. It was like, actually, I don't think Graffiti ever was on Friendster, but MySpace was before Facebook. And I think
Friendster was before MySpace?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. That's the first time I hear that one.
Yeah, you should look it up. It was just like, I was like, what the fuck is this, man? Like, what do you put pictures of yourself? That's weird. But then when MySpace came out, people started posting graph and shit. And I'm pretty sure Jess found me on there and would send me messages from time to time.
Okay.
But then around 2013 or 2014, I found SDP on Facebook. They had like a Facebook page.
Well, that's right, because Facebook came first before Instagram.
Yeah.
It was Flickr, I believe Flickr.
Yeah, Flickr was big.
And then Facebook. And then Instagram.
Yeah. But before Facebook was MySpace.
Yeah.
And so MySpace had graph on it. But I found a SDP on Facebook in 2014, and I saw like an image of like a text image or something that had a roll call.
Yeah.
And they had my name on there, even though I had left in 95. And so I'm like, oh, that's cool. Let's see what they're up to, you know? And they turned out they were doing like nonprofit work, and they were working with the Venice art walls and shit.
Yeah.
So I reached out to, I don't know if it was Bruno or Jess or somebody. And I was like, hey, I like what you guys are doing. Like, I'd like to get involved. Like, I never asked to like get put back on.
Yeah.
But they just sort of like were interacting with me like as if I was in the crew. So I just was like, all right, well, I just start writing it again, you know? So it was 2014. I started going to the Venice art walls, and I was volunteering there. So like I would volunteer on the weekends. And so this was the remnants of the Venice Pavilion. So the Venice Pavilion, for anybody that doesn't know, was like a hub for graffiti on the west side. So it was like, you know, if you ever played Tony Hawk Pro Skater, like it was in there, and lots of like, I spent a lot of time in the original Venice Pavilion.
I've seen a lot of pictures, but it's way before my time. I didn't make it.
It was amazing. It was like one of my favorite places to go.
Everybody would just hang out there, like just.
Yeah, it was weird. Like sometimes the cops would roll in and bust everybody, but like sometimes the cops would roll in and be like, "Hey, turn the music down."
Oh, so it was like a 50-50.
Yeah, it was illegal, but it was like most of the time they'll let you paint. But every now and then you hear like, "Oh yeah, they were doing a production, they got rolled, and everybody got arrested." So it was a really weird place. So we would go early in the morning just because like it seemed like more chill.
Time did do you know when they shut it down? What year?
I don't, because I remember I took a break from like around 2000 to about 2006. I stopped writing.
Okay.
I was focusing on building a business.
Okay.
And I remember when I wanted to get back into graph, I went to the Home Depot and I got some rustos. And that's when I learned like the rusto valve was different. And I was like, what the fuck?
What is this?
Yeah, because, and I'll get back to your other question, like about opening the shop. But I went down to the Venice Pavilion just to see some graph. And I was like, I couldn't find it. I was like, maybe I'm in the wrong place. Like, I can't find, like, where is it? It's supposed to be right here. And then I saw like the cones and I'm like, what the fuck is this? And like, it turned out they buried it. Like, I don't know when that happened, but, so anyway, like when I started linking up with the STPs in 2014, I started volunteering there. And that's when I learned, or I came to this realization there that really changed the trajectory of my whole life. I was like 40 years old at the time. My whole job was to like, people would walk up with paint and I'd be like, hey man, you guys going to paint today? And they'd be like, yeah. And I'd be like, all right, what are you trying to do? You going to do like a piece or a throwaway or something? Cause there was like such limited wall space. If they were like, oh, we're just going to fuck around, I'd be like, oh, okay, go over on these walls.
Yeah.
And then if people were doing like pieces, all right, go over here on this wall. Or if they were like really new,
Yeah.
I'd be like, don't go over this, go ahead and go up right here. There's just a bunch of tags and shit. Nobody's going to care. And so that's when I kind of started to learn that, it sort of brought back into my memory that there is some sort of, I don't know what the word is. I don't know if hierarchy is a good word, but like there's a respect for the past generation, that gets passed on to the youngsters,
Yeah.
So what, let me get to the point. So what I would notice, like, let's say I was talking to this teenager and kind of explaining how things work. And I remember looking at this kid and I'm like, this kid's actually listening to me. And he's a teenager and I'm 40 years old. And then I started thinking, I was like, when I was a teenager, I wouldn't listen to shit from a 40-year-old.
Yeah.
I'd be like, fuck this guy. He doesn't know what I'm trying to do,
Yeah.
And so I'm like, I started feeling there was a responsibility for me. I was like, I have a responsibility to like pass down this knowledge because I was remembering when I was coming up, like Gank schooled me. He came before me. He was young. He's younger than me. So he was like way younger than me at the time, a couple of years younger than me, but he was around longer. So he was schooling me on shit. But then he introduced me to Eclipse and Eclipse schooled me on shit. He gave me letters and all this kind of stuff. And so I started feeling like, here I am, this 40-year-old guy, like responsible dude. I own a business, I'm seeing some success. I owned a house at the time. And I was like, I could be a good influence for these kids because we have this mutual thing. Like we're both writers, even though I'm 40, I'm 51 now. At this time I was 40. Even though I'm 40, they're still listening to me. And like, I can have some kind of positive influence on these kids.
Yeah.
So I started really taking that seriously. And I was volunteering at Venice a lot. And I was trying to like intentionally, pass on some of this information, at that particular wall, it didn't matter as much, everybody knew like your paint's not even going to dry before somebody goes over you. But like, I would explain like, hey, if you go over this, you have to cover the whole thing, so do you have enough paint to cover all this? And they're like, well, why do I got to cover all of it? Well, if that guy comes and sees that you did your shit right in the middle, this stuff's hanging out.
Yeah.
I'm like, that's like a sign of disrespect. Like you got to cover the whole thing.
That's like a big slap in the face.
Yeah. So like, I was like kind of enjoying like passing this information on and trying to be a positive influence. So that's when I was like, I want to do this more, but like, I don't have enough time. I have a business to run. I can't be at Venice Art Walls like every day, but I wanted to do that every day. I wanted to be available, to pass on this knowledge. So I had an idea. I was like, well, I have this business, a motion graphics business. So I'm sort of tied to the computer all day. On the weekends, nobody's going to contact me. I worked on the weekends, but the businesses I worked for or that hired my company, they weren't going to call me on the weekends. So I was free to do that.
Yeah.
And I was like, how can I do this in a way that I can still run my business? So I was like, what if I open like sort of like a community space, we'll have a black book table, we'll have a gallery, we can have art shows and stuff like that. So when these kids come in, they'll have black book sessions. I can answer questions and kind of like create a positive space for them.
Yeah.
It wasn't meant to be a shop. Like we didn't have anything for sale. We did have a paint product that was coming out. I had a paint called Street Paint. It was the only American-made graph paint on the market at the time.
Is that the one you sold in San Pedro?
Yeah.
It was only black and white.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember.
That's Street Paint. Yeah.
I used it.
Yeah, it was good paint. During COVID, they increased the minimum so high that I couldn't afford to do it. So we were going to sell that. And it was just never really meant to be like a business. It was more meant to be like a community thing. And I was like, well, I can just set up. Like I rented a 2,400 square foot space. It was just long like that spot. And I just built a wall in the middle. And the front was like a gallery and like a black book table and shit. And then in the back, I actually just lived back there. I rented my house out to a buddy. And I was like, I'll just move in and fucking just be here all the time. So I did my motion graphics in the back. And then when these kids came in, I would kind of chop it up with them. And
Okay.
then they started asking about, you know, you guys ever going to sell anything? And I'm like, I don't know.
I might as well. Huh?
Yeah. So I was like, well, what would you want? And they're like, I don't know, like streakers, paint mark. Well, they called them painters.
Yeah.
Streakers, painters, this and that. I'm like, okay, all right, fuck it. So I bought one of those glass display cases. Found a source. I don't remember who it was, but that sold a bunch of different graph stuff. And so I started stocking just basic shit, you know, like streaks, different paint markers, and stuff like that. And then that just started kind of like, I was like, well, we have this black and white paint. We have this one display case with some shit. And this is costing me tens of thousands of dollars a year just to have this place.
Yeah.
Because it's $2,400 a month. I'm like, it doesn't make sense to not bring in any money. You know?
In 2013, that's a lot.
Yeah. It was pretty high actually. And so it just started evolving and I'm like, well, we can just kind of sell some stuff. And like, I didn't really take it all that seriously. Yeah. We had the black and white paint and I'm like, oh, would it be cool to get Rusto, you know? So like, I just went on the Rust-Oleum website and fucking found a phone number, called them up. And I was like, hey, what would it take to stock your stuff here? They sent a rep down and the guy sat with me and I'm like, I'm not going to say what shop it was, but this one guy told me, don't even bother because they're not going to let you, they won't do any business with any art related shit. So I believed him at the time, but now I'm like, I think he was bullshitting me, you know? Yeah. And because the guy was sitting there and like I had bombed up all the walls and shit and it was obviously like a graffiti spot. And so we're talking and I'm like, well, so are you guys cool with like selling like a business like this? And he's like, yeah, why wouldn't we be? And I'm like, I don't know. I thought like you guys didn't want to be affiliated with like graffiti and art and shit. And he's like, as long as you have the paperwork, we'll do business with you. So I'm like, fuck it. All right. So then we started selling Rusto and then they had that fucking, that dollar paint. I don't remember what it was called. Remember that dollar paint that, it wasn't Quick Color. It was something else. Something Touch or something. I don't remember.
Painter's Touch.
Painter's Touch.
Yeah.
Yeah, the silvers. So I just started stocking those and shit. And, you know, anyway, it just developed. It developed from there. And then eventually some kids came in and they were like, hey, do you print stickers? And I was like, it's like, why would we print stickers here? Like, that doesn't make any sense. And then another kid asked, and I'm like, well, I know how to screen print. So I'm like, fuck it, let's try it. And I built I had done some screen printing when I was in college because they had a lab there.
Yeah, yeah.
And they had this really cool table. It was like an air hockey table. Like that's what it looked like.
Yeah.
But it sucked air instead of blew air. And so you put the sheet of paper on it and it would hold it down and you print on it. So I'm like, I can make that. I just went to Home Depot. I bought some wood and I fucking drilled a bunch of holes. And I bought the screens and all this shit. And I'm like, I was developing them in the bathroom. You know, I figured it out.
Yeah.
And so I started selling stickers and then it just kept growing, you know, like it just kept year after year, just kept growing and growing. And then 2020, when they shut everything down, it was around that time that I started getting into more personal development, like 2019. Started reading a lot, started really trying to learn how to run a business, even though like I'd been running businesses since 2002 at that time. So I'd been in the game a long time, but I never read a business book. Like I knew how to do the skill. So when I was doing motion graphics, I was good at motion graphics, but I wasn't good at running a business. It's a different thing.
It's a different, it's a whole different world.
It's a different world. It's a
payroll, all kinds of stuff.
Yeah. So like 2019, I was like, I got to learn how to do this. Like, how do you run a business? You know, like I started reading a lot. 2020 came and that's when I was like, all right, I'm going to take this real serious. Well, by the end of 2019, I was like, I'm going to take this really seriously. So we had been in business for 5 years now. COVID hit, everybody shut down. And I was like, well, fuck it, man. I don't want to shut down. We shut down for like 2 weeks or something. And I sent everybody home. Well, not everybody. I had one employee. I sent him home.
Yeah.
And so a couple weeks in, I was like, man, fuck this shit, dude. And I called him up and I'm like, hey, you don't have to do this, man, but like, I want to get back to work. And he's like, oh my God, please let me come back to work. Like he was desperate to like, he was a youngster. He's like 15 years old.
Okay.
And he was like, I'm so sick of this shit, man. I just want to work. And I'm like, let's do it. So I made a post on Instagram. I'm like, come through, you know?
I went during COVID.
Did you?
I purchased paint during COVID.
So you had to like,
I went through the whole
order,
process.
you order it and then we brought it out to you. Yeah. So like a lot of the graph shops.
You couldn't even walk into the door. You just come out here.
Yeah. And I mean, that was, I don't wish that happened, but it was a good time, a good time for us because a lot of graph shops were like, you know, we're going to play it safe. And I don't want to get into all this conspiracy stuff, but like I was questioning what was going on. I was like, this doesn't make a lot of sense. Why can I go to Walmart, but I can't be open, you know, like I can go to Target and buy clothes, but like I can't have my little shop open. And like the cops were going down the street and sweating the army surplus store and shit, you know, and he was like, he was all fuck it, like, I'm open. Like, okay, come on in. Yeah. And so the cops were always going down there.
I'm ready for whatever.
Yeah. So I was like, what's in between? You know, they can order online. So we had people coming from like, they were like, I drove 2.5 hours.
Oh, wow.
To pick up paint. I'm like, really? They're like, all our shops are closed. Like everybody's closed. Nobody will sell to us. I'm like, well, fuck it, man. Let's go. We'll sell to you. You know, so we just pushed the limits as much as we could.
Were sales at its peak at that moment?
Well, that was what the crazy thing is, like the world's burning all around us, you know, like, you know, hypothetically, well, kind of literally, you know, when the riots were happening. Cause like, I'm trying to think of the timeline, but like when that started happening, it complicated things. So we were doing the pickup orders and probably when you came, like it was just the gate, right?
Yeah,
so you'd come and you'd call us, we'd bring your stuff out. And then when they started rioting, they were rioting right over the bridge and burning the buildings down and shit in Long Beach.
Yeah. And
so I was like, fuck. All right. So we put all these boards up. So the whole front of the shop was all boarded up. So I'm like, if you're here, you have to go in the parking lot in the back and then we'll go out. And so I'm in there, I'm like just strapped and fucking like, I don't know what's going to happen, you know? Like, and so I told my team, and at this time we had 4 people. It was me, this dude, Adrian, Ricardo, and then Cub was working for me now. Yeah. And I'm like, I'm going to stay open. Like, even though the shit's getting weird. And I'm like, I'll have my gun with me. You know, if somebody comes in, I'm like, you guys are welcome to fucking go out the back and run for your lives. But I'm like, I'm staying. I'm not, you know, I'm going to do whatever I can, you know? And everybody was down and like, it's pretty funny in retrospect. Like Cub was up on the roof, like looking around and shit.
Walking Dead style.
Yeah. He was just up there and we're all boarded up. Cause like there was some like flyers getting distributed around Pedro and it was like Antifa meetup, you know, in Pedro and shit. And Pedro wasn't having it, man. It was an interesting time because I don't know if you know Pedro. Like,
yeah, I know very well.
It's not you don't fuck with Pedro. You know what I mean? So like I was, you know, I'm not a Pedro native. You know what I mean? I had gone out there. I didn't know anything about it, but like I quickly learned like there was a lot of pride there. Yeah. So when those flyers started getting distributed, like everybody was outside with fucking bats and fucking crowbars and pipes and shit. Fucking all the gangsters and shit like came and like posted up in front of the buildings and shit. And it was like, there's no riots going to happen here.
Why Pedro? Why did you choose that location?
I was looking all over the place, and a buddy of mine, the guy that I ended up renting my house to, he sent me an article from the LA Weekly, I think it was. And it was talking about this like up and coming art scene in San Pedro. And like, I learned after I got there that it was like up and coming for like 25 years or something. It was like always this up and coming art scene out there. But it's a pretty funny thing. It's like up and coming for a fucking quarter century. You know,
they opened up something called the craft something. It was like a big old warehouse.
Yeah,
But nothing's really going on in there.
yeah. I don't know. That was pretty cool for more like I don't know what you would call it, not graph type stuff, but
So he was the reason why you went towards San Pedro?
yeah. So he sent me the article, and I didn't even know like if you said like San Pedro, I had heard of it, but I didn't even know where it was. I was like, where the fuck is San Pedro? You know, so like I read the article and it was talking about the art walk and all this stuff, and I'm like, that's fucking cool. Like that would be cool to have what I wanted to do, which was like this sort of like, you know, little community space for graph writers to have like a place they could come and black book and, you know, just be, you know, comfortable in their own kind of environment. Like they can't go to the library and black book together or something like that. I'm like, they need a little space where they can do that. And so I read the article about the art walk and all that kind of stuff. And so I started just driving around and I was like, man, it's pretty cool out here. And like the downtown is like really small, but on 6th Street, you know, there's all these cool little shops there and
a lot of history down there.
Yeah. So I was like, this place is cool. And so I started just writing down phone numbers and yeah, it was just, I was like, this seems like a cool place to do this.
Yeah.
And it actually was. I mean, it was good and bad. You know, like the good part was that it's a really cool community. And like the fact that I was there literally 24 hours a day because I lived there and I was the only one working the counter until I started hiring people.
But you also played a role in bringing art into San Pedro because you had a cuts crew.
Yeah.
Where you guys would come out and, you know, paint stuff in the community.
Yeah. So that's when everything started kind of like, I started getting really passionate about giving back. Like, and that's kind of where I'm at now still with graph. It's like, I love graph and like, I still like get the itch to go catch a spot every now and then, you know, but I feel like my role now is like trying to inject more positivity and more education and things like that into the scene. So like, that's why I do a lot of the content that I do. We talked about this yesterday, you know, it's not so much like I know the OGs aren't like learning shit from me, you know, it's like I could learn from them, you know, but it's like this stuff that I'm putting out, it's like trying to help, like I always try to stress, like, I'm not trying to get more people into the scene. I'm trying to make the new people better. You know what I mean?
And you do a good job at it. I mean,
I appreciate that.
I watch your informative videos, like the caps, the markers, and I think you put it very well.
Oh, thanks, man.
And I really enjoy it. I watch it, you know, and I think, oh, that's cool, you know, because for someone that doesn't really know, they're going to be like, oh, maybe I want to try this one instead now. You know what I mean?
That's the whole intent. It's just kind of like, it sort of feels like, I don't know how many mentors these youngsters have anymore. You know, like, I don't know.
It has definitely changed out there.
It seems that way. That's my perception. I'm not out there like I used to be. So I don't know if there's like people passing things along, and like this whole mentality kind of started happening when I had the shop. Like the youngsters would come in and I would kind of like try to help, like be a positive influence, but they were doing drugs and they were doing all this kind of shit. And I'm like, man, you shouldn't be doing Xanax at 14 years old, man. I'm like,
it's gonna mess you up all the way.
Yeah, I'm like, you guys aren't even developed yet. I'm like, stick to weed or something, you know, take it easy, you know.
Yeah.
So I would have those interactions with the youngsters and try to tell them, like, don't burn the spot. Like, if you're tagging like all around the area and then you come walking in here, like that's gonna bring heat on us, and try to educate them in that way. But then I'd have older writers come in and complain about all the youngsters, you know, like, these kids have no respect and like they don't know any of the rules and they don't know shit and all this kind of stuff. And I'm like, well, wasn't that our responsibility to pass that knowledge?
Yeah.
You know, like, isn't that how this works? Like,
I really enjoyed the conversation when you talk about pick up or paint.
Yeah.
So I really digested that from you, where you were like, you know, if you're in a yard and you're painting, or like a train yard, you know, you want to keep the spot low key. So pick up your cans and take them with you.
Yeah.
Right? And like
simple things like
for
that.
me as a kid, bro, I'll be honest, like every time I went into a yard, there was paint everywhere.
Everywhere, yeah.
So to me, I thought that was normal.
Yeah.
But as I started getting older, I started realizing, like, hey, bro, you know, I'm not supposed to be doing this. You know what I mean? So it's things like that that really opens up the naked eye to understand. Like, there's like not real rules, but like untold rules type thing.
Yeah, exactly. There's sort of like unwritten,
Like common courtesy.
yeah, and that's what I try to, every time I post any kind of rules thing, there's always like the handful of comments that people are like, "This is craft. There ain't no rules, man."
Yeah.
And I'm like, dude, like, we're out there doing crime, man. Like, we have to have some understanding. You know what I mean?
Even mobsters and cartel members have
They got
structure.
rules. Yeah, you can't just go and do shit however you want. Like, and yeah. So I mean, I always get those comments like "fuck the rules" and all this stuff, and I'm like, all right, well, we should have some understanding. Like, don't write on the churches, don't write on people's cars. There's some rules that like I have a hard time with. Like, if you can't burn it, don't go over it.
Yeah.
Like, that to me is so subjective. It's like, what if you have a really high opinion of your shit and you're like, it's way better than that, but it's really not, So like, I try not to even talk about that rule. I just like, I tell people like, if the wall looks like this, go ahead. It's fair game.
Yeah.
There's a bunch of shit all over the place. Like, nobody's going to get pissed if you go over that,
But if you got a full-on burner with a background and all kinds of crazy stuff,
Yeah,
like,
just leave it alone. Like,
just enjoy it.
You might as well, like, you've been to a lot of yards.
Yeah.
Like, there's always spots that look like,
yeah.
like some skater kid drew a dick on it and fucking, like, there's just all this bullshit,
Yeah.
I love fucking so-and-so. Like, just those spots are always there. So like, I try to encourage people, like, just do something there. Just make it work. If you're going to go over something that somebody put a lot of time in, even if you burned it, like they're still going to probably be pissed,
Now that we're in that subject, brother, I wanted to get into where does "Don't Be a Dick Day" come from? I like that.
That was, I mean, I started getting into all this shit that was just like, how much more can I do for the community? So like, to just backtrack a little bit, and I'll get to that point. We opened up the community thing and I had so much energy because, how you get into something like when you started your podcast, like all this momentum builds up. Like now you have like a mobile podcast travel thing. You know what I mean? Like when you first started, it was on your phone. And then you're like, I got to get this. Now I got a studio. The momentum that you get. I had that momentum for doing positive shit for the graph culture. And so it was like, I was like, what do we do next? Cuts crew. So clean up the streets. We'll have like this positive crew that we do like graph style shit, but we clean up the neighborhood, like create a positive experience for people, And then, that's where the podcast came in. It was like Cub and I were having these conversations.
May he rest in peace, by the way.
Yeah, miss him a lot. But what I was talking about earlier, like the OGs would come in and they would complain about all the kids. And I was batting around a podcast. So I was like, well, maybe I could do this like on an audio thing and get more information out there to people. And I was talking to Cub one day. He was at the shop. He was joining the Cuts crew. So he was coming around a lot. And he and I were talking, and I had already brought up the idea of a podcast to him, not so much having him on it, but I was like, I want to do this. And he's like, yeah, you should do that. That'd be dope. But we're having this conversation once, and it was about don't burn the spot, like shit like you're talking about. Clean up your cans, like don't fucking do all this shit. We talked for like an hour, just, I was behind the counter and he was buying stuff. And I was like, man, we should have just recorded this conversation, man. I'm like, that's the podcast. And he's like, oh yeah. And I'm like, you want to do it with me?
Yeah.
And he's like, yeah. And I'm like, all right, cool, let's do it. And that's how it started. And it wanted to be like this positive thing. And so the Don't Be a Dick Day was just another addition to that, like building on that momentum. It was just kind of like, people do these contests and stuff, and it's like, we're going to give away these products. So, share, like, comment, follow.
Oh, yeah.
All these kind of things. And I did some of those things when I would try to promote the shows, at the thing, I would be like, you can win a free run of stickers, if you share this thing and whatever, share the flyer. Then eventually, like I was reading more and I was kind of educating myself, and somebody had brought up, they were like, these contests could kill your social media. Because let's say we're a graph shop and I'm like, we're going to give away an iPad, it's completely unrelated to the shop, right?
Yeah.
I'm not saying that
Yeah.
graph shops do this. Well, let's put it in a graph shop perspective. Let's say I did a contest and I was like, you could win 36 cans of Montana 94.
Okay.
Like that's a highly incentivized prize. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like that's a lot of paint, it's a lot of money. And then you say you have to follow us in order to win. What
Share
ends
the
up
post and all
happening,
that stuff.
yeah, what ends up happening is you're going to get a lot of people that just follow you because they want to win that shit. And then they get followers that also want to win that shit. They share it, bring in all these followers. And then what ends up, the possibility that you're opening up is that you're going to have a big thing people never engage stuff. And that kind of made me like rethink the contest and shit. I was like, if you have like 10,000 followers, like you got 7,000 from a contest and your shit ever again.
Yeah.
So your rate of engagement followers like way lower into the week until it,
I understand what you're saying. I've
Yeah.
done my lyrics and I what done, and I
Yeah.
understand the thinking.
well, and that's what got about it differently. Like, oh, I'm going to use this as like another thing, just like positivity. Instead, it came up as like, I don't remember where the name came, but just thought it was funny. And it's like, we're just all I have to do is think about that into that. I like how cool
Yeah.
get out. This requires like there's a dollar list, multiple, you know.